Welcome to the Get Safe Guardian podcast, where we sit down with interesting people from law enforcement, military, leaders in community and industry, trying to get their perspective on how to keep all of us safer. Today, I've got a couple of different guests with a vastly different background. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, starting with the fellow on my left, and we'll wrap around the table to our virtual guest.
So my name is Don Clough. I am currently employed by the Ada County Sheriff's Office. I'm a crisis intervention team deputy, which means what I deal with is I deal with mental health. I deal with suicidal subjects and people with disabilities. So that's all I do for my whole work week. That's all I do. There's that many calls for service for us. I'm also a parent. I have 5 kids. They're all adopted. And my middle child is on the spectrum. So he has developmental delays with autism. I forget what the exact diagnosis is at this second, but he's on the spectrum. It's been a lot of fun learning.
My name is Dana Batts, and I've got a bit of a vast background myself. So I'm ex-military, and I also am the president of Lylas House nonprofit. I am one of the founders as well. And I've got 2 little ones. They are both on the spectrum, and I recently found out I am as well, which was an interesting realization, but also an interesting diagnosis. And Tiffany actually is on my team. So
awesome. Tiffany?
Yep. So I am Tiffany Klawa. I am the vice president of Lylas House. Previously, I was the executive director for Autism Society of Idaho, doing pretty much everything I could to be an advocate and a resource for everybody in Idaho that's got a disability of any kind, mainly focused on autism. And I am the mom of a very ornery, rambunctious 5-year-old who is on the spectrum, level 2, and he was nonverbal, recently started talking. So my entire world is autism and all things disabilities.
So just to be fair, Get Safe is a 2-part company. We have the 1-part company in Southern California that services all the regional centers, that does all of the safety training, functional legal competency, relationship training, personal safety and awareness, and just like life skills for those on the autism spectrum. And then there's this side, the Guardian side, which we actually do outward facing training with law enforcement, companies, corporations, schools, anybody that needs that personal safety stuff, but also bringing awareness to autism, because there's a lot of when we started some of the school safety stuff, there was some misinformation saying that there was a direct correlation to somebody being an active shooter and somebody being on the autism spectrum. So we've worked pretty hard trying to dispel that, because there's no correlating data to suggest that that's true. So to that point, can we talk about Lylas House for just a second?
Yep.
What is Lylas House?
So Lylas House actually was established a couple of years ago. I have 2 littles on the spectrum, and they had actually been removed from multiple schools, from daycare preschools, because they no longer had the resources. And so my dad called me one day and goes, "Hey, if they don't have the resources, why don't we make them?" And I said, "All right, game on, let's do it." So our overall large arching goal is to have an autism school, and actually have them nationwide and worldwide, where we actually create a school that's built around their sensory sensitivities and give them a specific track of their own that can work for their brain, instead of sticking them in a traditional school. And so right now what we're doing actually is I decided, once Tiffany and I worked together for the Autism Walk, to go ahead and create a sensory space at the Autism Walk itself. So then they had the opportunity to go in there and do sensory reset and continue being there if they wanted to. So I built these sensory tents, and I have adult and children versions, and we have a 10 by 30 tent that we bring to events. And that's one of our main focuses right now, but we're also in law reform with what Tiffany has been advocating for, which is amazing. And we have a couple different things that we're working on right now, but that's kind of the gist, is we want to bring those sensory spaces to the community and give them the opportunity to sensory reset and continue in those spaces. I keep doing it too. But our overall arching goal is to create state-of-the-art autism schools and eventually just neurodivergent schools in general. So
How's that going?
really good. I think starting out, it's a challenge. One, being a parent of 2 kids with autism, there that comes with its daily challenges. And like, for instance, sometimes I'm on my way to something and one of my daughters doesn't let me out the door because she doesn't want me to leave. And that can be a challenge. It could also be that, like right now, they're home for summer full time. And I'm really lucky my husband works from home and can help me with things like this. But at the same time, it could also be a major challenge when he doesn't have the bandwidth to give. So on the actual nonprofit side of it, we're really working on how can we serve the community right now until we can reach that goal, that financial goal of being able to build a school from scratch.
Sure.
And that's probably the most challenging aspect of it, is getting our name out there and also showcasing at the same time, this is what we're doing now to help, but this is what we want to do overall.
So one of the biggest reasons I brought Dawn on, other than we have worked together from time to time doing different police type training stuff, is we've had this conversation with, as a parent of somebody on the spectrum, how does law enforcement help communities when they respond to calls for service, whether it's a de-escalation, a crisis intervention, or just an out of control person or child? How do they plug that family into a resource that's going to help them help themselves?
That's a big question. There's a couple different ways to do that, I would think. If we're liaisoning our community with law enforcement, there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. One of them being that there is if I get the name of it wrong, I apologize. It's a vulnerable persons list. Is that what it's called?
Vulnerable population registry on the dispatch center.
Yeah.
The thing about that is only here in Ada County. So that's Ada County, Boise, Meridian, Garden City. And so that, and Eagle, Star, and Cuna. So that's an awesome tool, which I have a success story for that too, which was really, really nice. But it needs to be expanded because it helps all emergency services when we find them, especially when they're wanderers. So it's a huge tool.
I have an eloper, my youngest. And both of my kids are actually on that registry just in case that happens.
Perfect.
Gotcha.
So for them, it's one of the things that I've actually spoken about to multiple people in law enforcement. I was a police officer in the military. Is how do we have all these facial recognition software that we see, like the FBI and the CIA and the feds use. How can we kind of utilize that software to do the same thing, where it's like if a officer responds and the child's nonverbal and they're an eloper or a wanderer, how can we help get them home to a safe place? And so I'm like, well, if we have them registered and we can take a picture of them and upload that picture into the registry and they're already in there, boom, we have their address. We can take them home safely, stuff like that. And I'm sure that there's a lot more to it.
So I want to take a real quick tangent over here. And this is not for anything other than Tiffany, your previous employer or your position in the state of Idaho. I'm not sure how you want to. They are currently the TA, the training authority for the Kevin and Avante grant. While we're talking about elopement, we are one of, I think, we are one of the bigger agencies that teaches recovering missing persons for law enforcement. It's a down and dirty virtual course that's paid for through the Kevin and Avante grant to help with elopement behavior. And then we have a community side, which is elopement prevention and response, which is for parents and caregivers to understand elopement behavior and how they can, safeguard their houses and their positions with that kind of stuff. Like, what other resources are available here in Idaho? Because I know that as Get Safe is a national organization, sort of, we're nationally in name, sort of like not that
Correct.
we're small, but we have reach. What is the thing here?
So the Autism Society of Idaho was working on that when I was there. I was the main person that was in contact with Nationals Autism Society of America and dealing with the Avante grant. We had been the people on the ground training law enforcement. We had done it with Kootenai County Sheriff's Office. On the books, we have it. They had it scheduled for Caldwell in December of this year, trying to get it all trained out. I had also been working with the endangered and missing person alert because that had just passed not that long ago, and they have been trying to train law enforcement on that. So we were trying to work in tandem with that. So it wasn't just multiple trainings and taking people out of active duty and away from their actual jobs. So they, one, knew how that system would work, those alerts, what to look for. And then we were providing sensory tools to the law enforcement that they would have in their squad cars. So if they approached an individual that had some kind of a developmental disability, they did have the tools in their cars ready to use to help desensitize them, because the loud sirens, the bright lights, lots of unknown activity. It's pretty hectic when you are around any emergency situation. That is something that we were really working on with law enforcement to try and de-escalate those situations, because it's just stressful all around. And then you add in an individual that may not understand exactly what's going on, and it just escalates and escalates and escalates, which is unfortunate. And that's how a lot of people, not only the individuals, get hurt and possibly killed, but same with the officers. So we're trying to bridge that gap, because there seems to be a very big disconnect between law enforcement and then like such an individual with autism saying that they don't care about each other, when it's not the case. They just don't understand, and there's just not enough time basically to get to a scene and then immediately have to act. They can only do so much with the information they're given. So that was something that's extremely passionate about, is providing those tools.
And that's a really good point. So our CEO went to some big conference for recovering missing persons in Southern California. And the focus, he said like 90% of the focus was technology. We've got drones, we've got robots, we've got this, we've got that, we've got all of this technology. But the human aspect of it, that piece that bridges the gap between you and me, was missing, which is where we insert our stuff, because connection and communication equal safety. Now, just so that people understand, I had to find the email because it just came up yesterday. Here are the statistics for elopement. Just 1 and 2. So 50% of elopers are found within 24 hours. 3 out of 4 are found within a week. 4% are found deceased. And of those, that's approximately 84% die by drowning.
Yes.
So those numbers aren't, horrible, I guess, if you're looking at it from a statistical margins perspective. However, if you consider that most of those are kids, they're not grown adults. They are children. That is 1 out of 2 is too many. 3 out of 4 isn't enough. So,
and then if you add in the fact that Idaho is full of mountains and trees and forests and lakes and rivers,
and
it's
animals,
very terrifying
in
for
those
us
areas.
as parents. Like, and a lot of kids that are autistic are attracted to water. It's one of the first places, if I had ever been reached or contacted by law enforcement, did you search the water? Like, is there any ponds, anything near you? Go there first, because it's just an appealing thing for individuals on the spectrum, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's right on the nose for my kids. My youngest has eloped 4 times, and that was with contingencies in place in our home to ensure that that didn't happen. And one of those 4 times wasn't at our house. So, and she's the same thing. She's a water baby. She doesn't like open bodies of water like the ocean and stuff, but if she can find a pool, she can find water to play in, she'll go. So,
and it doesn't take much water either. So, Dawn, from a law enforcement perspective, like what training is available that you've that you're aware of to help support the law enforcement effort in recovery?
So for us, we have the option is there's a CIT 40, which has got part of the autism training into that, right, for the 40 hours. But obviously with me, it's been within, I can speak for the sheriff's office for Ada County, is I've taught that for several years with our guys. And we're now doing an academy where we teach about disabilities, mental health, but we've expanded that training. And then I break it out into a block of just on autism. And the things you're talking about is we have those procedures when kids go missing, right? Or I shouldn't say, let's back up. We have a missing person. We have certain protocols, no matter what the
Right.
situation is. We go to the house, we start searching the house, and then we work our way out. And what I teach all of our guys is very simple. Do that. However, I want you to take one person and I want you to designate that person to do water. Wherever that water is, go find it. That's your job. And you search all the areas for water. So they do that. And then what I also do is, it's a lot of things is obviously is education. Once we relocate the child, then we'll tell the parents. One thing I like to do, tell them, is I like to have them make an emergency flyer, have a picture of them and, they're all the things that they are trigger them or things that help calm them down, de-escalate them. And so that they can immediately just hand it to us and we can take a picture and we can text it out to all of us involved in it. And then also once we recover the child too, as well, is I tell the parents, I'm like, hey, when you get a chance, some really good options, different locks and things, but kids will always figure that out. But we'll talk to them about putting cameras up so we have a clue right off the bat. Hey, they went left, they went right. And I keep hitting this cord, but that's okay. But then the other thing is I tell the families, I'm like, hey, take about 2 hours out of your time when you get a chance. And they said, then I want you to start at your front door and just say, go, and just follow them and figure out where they go.
Yeah.
And so that you have an idea of what they're going to do, because, as a parent, you're thinking, oh, they're going to go over here. And you're like, whoa, they went that way. Why'd they go that way? Oh my gosh, there's the beware of dog. And they're beating on the fence with the beware dog and laughing. And the dog's like just barking their head off at them. Right. And so you're like, oh, they went that way last time. And then also the part of that training is, hey, what do you do when you take your child to school, when you go to the store? What is your routine? What path do you go? Because obviously very repetitive. What are they used to doing? And, they'll drive it, but we've had kids who have left and they walk those. And so we start there and start searching that way. So it's a kind of a multifaceted thing. It's, hey, this is how you do searches for missing people. And then you cut one person out of there and that's their new job is water. That's it. And so we also we talk about all that good stuff about, hey, I don't need everybody yelling and screaming. I need the dogs to be quiet. I need your lights and siren off. I need one person calling their name. That's it. And and then we also have the drone capability and stuff if we have that need. It just depends on what the situation is, but we talk about that for quite a while. So that's a big thing that I started obviously years ago when I found out my child was on the spectrum as well. It was obviously very passionate, and so that's how we teach it. So, and I have to say that our response has been really, really good. I always hear that. I get calls from my guys 24 hours a day, which will stop here in about 23 days as I retire. But
Congrats.
yeah, thanks. So, but we really push that training and education on that part. And then, which the problem with Idaho is there's not a lot of resources, as you know.
Right.
And so, and that's where I have to say, as a parent, for me, not understanding. And then once I got the diagnosis in the beginning, because he was also nonverbal in the beginning, all of a sudden that was empowering. It's like, oh, okay, now I know. And it was amazing to watch him develop because now I understood how to communicate with him. Another thing that I also do is I tell people because we all get phones from work, and I'm like, you need to go online. I said, here's an app that I have, it's like the old PEC style stuff. Right. And I'm like, it's just free. Just use this one. I'm like, it'll give you limited use, and then but I'm like, you don't have to pay for it, just use it. So when you come in contact with somebody who's nonverbal, which is really great, because I had a little kiddo that was wandering on Columbia. And if you're not familiar with the area, very rural, but the speed limit's 50. And she's just walking right down the middle of the road, and people don't stop. It was a little infuriating until a teacher stops and she grabs her, and then one of our CUNA guys gets out there, and then I jam over there and realize right off the bat the teacher's like dialed in. She's nonverbal. I'm like, cool, okay. Grab my phone, boop, grab it, and I don't think she had one of those, but she was on top of it quick, and she just hits angry. I'm like, okay, we're having a bad day. All right, let's figure this out.
Right.
And then we got her reunited and stuff, but it just takes a little bit of time. But it's that training, that education to everybody, and we push it pretty hard. Boise's got a really good program too, and they do the CIT 40, and they had an instructor. She's also just retired recently. She taught about autism as well. So I would say the Valley, just like the rest of Idaho, this Valley is pretty decent in that training. But as soon as you get inside Ada County, just because of resources, it really drops off quickly. So, you have your hubs in Twin and Idaho Falls and Coeur d'Alene, but it really gets out when you get outside of those, that training really drops off.
Well, you made 3 really good points, actually, that I think we should talk about a little bit more, which is one of those is actually you also made the same point, which is starting in our homes. When we start in our homes, for us, we learned real quick after our youngest eloped the first time. Okay.
Terrifying.
It's all the worst questions you can ask start swirling in your head.
Oh yeah.
And we have girls. And so those questions compound.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things is we have window and door alerts for every single exit, including the ones in the garage. So we have alerts like chimes that go off every time a door or window opens or closes. And my husband and we have learned to do call outs. So if it's a window and let's say it's in my office, I'll call out, that was me. And he does the same thing. That was me. I'm the one going out. The hard part is when we don't really have a lot of family gatherings, because if people come to our house, we have to teach them, basically train them. Hey, if you go in and out, you have to make sure you call out. You have to do this, that, and the other thing, because our youngest actually got out at my parents' house and they didn't have any safeguards. Another thing that you had pointed out was the young woman in the middle of the road. People aren't going to stop. You're right.
It's really weird.
Well, and the general population, when you've got, and I'm just as guilty, and this is something for me to change too, is when you've got someone that's riding their bike in the middle of the road, or they're crossing and they're jaywalking, or whatever situation you come against, your initial thought is to get, okay, what's this person freaking doing? Like it's just our natural response, something that we've learned over time, whether it was from our parents or whatever. And one thing that we can do to help those more vulnerable populations is have that different perspective. We get mad when someone turns a corner too slow and we're on a 50-mile-an-hour freeway. It's like, okay, do they have a kid in the car though? And if they turn that too quickly, is it going to cause that sensory problem? Or, hey, they have a birthday cake in the car? So it's humanizing the people that are around you, which is something I feel like we lack to do. But I'm glad to hear that you guys have a lot of these programs in place and these trainings. And honestly, I think the best place for you guys to start is the same in your situation, where you have an autistic kid and you can train from personal experience, not just from an outside perspective. And I actually know somebody who's getting ready to go into the academy that has an autistic son. And I'm like, you're perfect. Like, let's get you put into those programs and have you work together to do that training, because you can train from a different perspective of someone who just has knowledge of autism versus someone who's actually in it every day,
You're both bringing up, great pieces. Now, I am not speaking on a I know it all basis, but what I've seen is the areas that you're talking about that don't have the training falls off because the resources aren't there, right? So we just want to be very upfront. We have a lot of stuff that's free for law enforcement. We have like an 8-hour CIT class that's paid for by the federal government that they show up and we cover autism for an hour of 8 hours.
Mm.
And then we have the 2 recovery missing persons CPR. So you're not in Southern California, and go on our website at Get Safe University and just you can log in and take the self-paced course.
Mm.
And so we have these free things, but getting people to be like do it on their own has been it's a nightmare.
Difficult.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's almost like don't make me do what I need to do.
Mm. And then you've got people with like learning challenges like myself too. I'm a full-time college student, and one of the things that I struggle with, and this is part of my autism and my neurodivergence, is that those quick transitions when you have 7-week classes are really tough for me. So it'll take 2 or 3 weeks for me to actually get plugged in and focused on it. But when they're 7-week classes, you're halfway through the class at this point. So I have to have specific accommodations where it's okay, even though I'm in these 7-week classes right now, these 7-week classes are coming up. I need to get together with the professors weeks in advance and say, hey, I need access early so I can at least adapt and adjust before we even start.
Yep.
But another thing that you just said that that is something that Tiffany and I have had many, many, many conversations about is, you know, when we respond as police officers, and I say we, even though I'm former, we respond as police officers. We know most of the time when we're going to a house with a felon and somebody who has a record. We know these things. I think it would be something that we could at least take a look at when it comes to when we get dispatched. One of the things that the dispatcher asks, is there anyone that's neurodivergent in that house? And I don't know if there's like a HIPAA thing there, but it would be helpful if they could send the officer in knowing what they're walking into, just like we would if there was a felon.
So HIPAA, and if you're a scholar, correct me. If not, then it's the truth. HIPAA is an insurance thing, Health Insurance Privacy Act.
Mm.
Correct.
So
Yep.
we aren't bound by HIPAA in law enforcement, nor are you as a family member bound by HIPAA.
Mm.
That is a hospital
But
thing.
but it is a
Yes.
huge it's not a speed bump, it's a mountain in the road
Mhm.
when it comes to communicating with anybody outside of law enforcement and family.
Mm.
The law is very clear about how HIPAA we can get involved in that. You can talk to us about HIPAA because we're doing investigations, we're involved in it, we have missing persons. But oh my gosh, it is a giant mountain if you want to talk to anybody. It has to do with any kind of medical stuff. Schools, it's when schools aren't so bad, but it's just I pull my hair out. I'm like, yes, you can talk to me. I need to know this information so I can provide some quality, anything to these folks. I need this information. They're like, I
Right.
can't talk to you. You're like, oh, and that's in the mental health realm as well. No matter where it's at, it's like, I'm trying to figure out how to help this person.
Right.
Stop making this a secret. But that's the other thing you talk about training too, is something I wanted to bring up is that all the stats that I see is, and one of the biggest things I push too is that if you have a disability, no matter what it is, right? Mental health, it's just doesn't matter. Medical, you're 7 times more likely coming in contact with law enforcement.
Correct.
Because people say, oh, that's not normal. And so that's why it's so important to have that education and training for law enforcement.
Mm.
And that's why we pushed it so hard.
Mm.
And like I said, I can speak for my guys because I know I get lots of calls, and that's great. And every time I see a call, it's got a kid on the spectrum. I'm like, hey, I'm on the way. So it works out well. But yeah, it falls off. It's that you got to handle the calls for service. You've got this many hours of training mandatory you have to keep your certificate, but that mental health aspect is not part of that mandatory training.
Yeah. Well,
So it needs to be, because like I said, 7 times more likely
yeah.
Right.
I'm going to respond to a person like that.
Right. Is it feasible for law enforcement? And I know this would take time. Excuse me. Is it feasible for law enforcement to put together a task force that's trained for these things? So let's say, each city has their own, whether it's even 2 people, 3 people, that per shift, that are able to respond once we realize we have somebody that is neurodivergent and they have that training? Is that something feasible to do over time?
So what you have again is in Ada County and Boise and Meridian, you have crisis intervention teams. So
Okay.
we are all co-responder models. My partner is a clinician. Fantastic. I love her. She used to work for another police agency, and then she became a clinician, and so it's awesome. She talks both languages, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's really awesome. We go out and we deal with that, and we can take care of business. So we have that. Boise has what they call a behavioral response team. Meridian has a crisis intervention team, but they have 2 officers, 1 clinician. Boise has currently 2 clinicians, 1 officer because he just retired. One of them, they're trying to get another officer, and then we have 2 deputies and 2 clinicians on our team. So the goal is, I know for the sheriff's office, is that I know the sheriff wants to expand it. It's just where do you get the resources, where do you get the funds? Because
and I'm sure that's something we could probably help you guys out with too, is because we spend, Tiffany especially, Tiffany's the guru with knowing where everything is. She's great at researching, I'm telling you. Finding those funds, even if it is finding a philanthropist that has, an autistic kid that understands, but also just working together like we're doing right now to train each other and help each other understand. Because even though I was a police officer for a few years in the military, I have a very different outcome and outlook now that I am a parent of kids with autism, because I wasn't whenever I was doing that. And so there's this sometimes this language barrier that we have, even though I have been on both sides of it as well, just like you, that we have to now teach it to people who haven't been in that and don't have autistic kids. And we have to also help them learn, how do you help when you see one? How do you help whenever you come across a situation like that, like the teacher who understood.
So there's this comes up quite a bit in these conversations, and I think it's always worth repeating. The average cop gets in a 5-year period with mandatory training, like you're talking about, in dealing with people, on average, 91% of that training, whether it's academy or in service, over a 5-year period, is firearms, defensive tactics, and arrest and control techniques, which leaves 9% for communication. Now, communication encompasses crisis intervention, de-escalation, strategic and tactical comm, and then all of the things that fall into that: mental illnesses, disabilities, cognitive disorders, PTSD, whatever it is. Those all fall into 9%. Now, if you look at it from a very 1,000-foot perspective, you have every call you go on, you have to talk to somebody. But a fraction of those calls, you're pulling your gun out. A fraction of those calls, you're putting hands on. A fraction of those calls, you're putting handcuffs on somebody. So we spend so much time focusing on the fine motor skills, we neglect the fact that just because you can make words fall out of your mouth doesn't mean that you can make words fall out of your mouth in a way that makes sense and solves a problem.
Right.
So we like to encourage that communication aspect of it because it's so important. If you're a good communicator at work, you're a great communicator at home. So that's my soapbox.
How much less would we have to pull a weapon? How much less would we have to put on cuffs? How much less would we have to have hands-on if we had more training in this?
See, it gets complicated, right? Like, we want to talk about the crisis intervention stuff as if it's and just to be clear,
or training and communication as well.
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
But let's focus on CIT for a second. We know that people are that are suicidal or in crisis, they need a different approach. However, a crisis is, by definition, when your coping mechanisms become overwhelmed and are no longer functioning. That can happen when the police pull you over and you have warrants, or you've just committed a crime. That can happen when your routine is disrupted. That can happen at any point in time, and we've all experienced it. That doesn't necessarily have a mental health capacity. It just means that I am not in this moment able to control myself because I'm escalated.
Right.
People escalate in 5 for 5 different reasons. Their safety is in jeopardy. They don't have a control of the situation. They have no voice in the situation. They're threatened of embarrassment, or their achievement, their goal is being stopped.
Right.
So if one of those 5 things exists, now I have my brain flashes over to the amygdala, and now I'm in a feelings response model. So it's fight, flight, or freeze, and that is now crisis mode. When we talk about the communication stuff, it's being able to articulate the fact that you are probably in crisis because of one of these 5 things, and how to get you back to a place of grounding where you can make a decision that's good for you.
Right.
I think you can talk people into handcuffs a fair portion of the time. It's not an absolute, because people are unpredictable. There's absolutely no way to prevent that. And even if they're on the special needs side of things, still unpredictable. I can tell you from my time in working in schools is we had a child, a 9-year-old kid, that would habitually attack people with staplers. He'd kick out plate glass windows. He tried to put a hole punch through a teacher's head.
Jeez.
And there's not any amount of communication that's going to de-escalate that.
Right.
That required a higher level of physical control.
Right.
And so I think that the training should focus on communication, but also on tactical decision making, and not tactics like SWAT tactics, but tactics like, this is all the information that I have. What is the best thing I can do in this moment to solve this problem with the least amount of resistance?
Right.
And I think that's where the critical decision making has to go. Now, some cops are great at it, and flashing a gun is a really fast way to get things solved.
Right.
And sometimes it's an escalation. So you have to be able to balance the two.
Right. Yeah, it's something that you guys definitely have to think about is when you're out on a call, is you're not just thinking about just what's happening right in front of you. When you have a really good police officer, they're thinking about the physical, mental, and emotional response of the individual that they're responding to, you know? But that's not always common. Sometimes that is just how we were raised too. You know, I've been taught and raised to do that. I spent a lot of time in the special education room growing up just because I enjoyed being around them. And as a police officer, it's like, okay, whenever I come up to a situation, where are they at mentally comes to my mind first, and then physically, and then emotionally. And sometimes it would switch the moment I made contact. But in those moments, you know, there was things that I knew how to deal with differently than I would probably say 90% of the people that I worked with. And it's no one's fault. We're all learning. It's a learning curve. At the same time, how can we make it better? And that's why spending time with you guys and learning what your current perspective is, because it's been 10 years since I've been a police officer, and a lot has changed since then.
A lot.
Yeah. And so it's like, now I need to know, or what I want to know, what does it look like for you guys? What does it look like for us? What does it look like for those of us who, are on both sides of it?
Yep.
And that's where, a lot of what Tiffany does comes into play with Lylas House. Is she helps us maintain that balance, but also continue that outreach so that we can help in all facets. Because yes, education, their actual education schooling is really important. At the same time, if we don't teach safety and we don't teach communication, and sometimes communication isn't verbal. When you have a baby, are you verbally communicating with that baby? Probably not. You're learning body language. And so sometimes that communication is language through movement versus language through verbalization. And I think us learning how to work with that will help the entire situation when it comes to this vulnerable population of individuals.
So on the other side of that, can I chime in?
Please.
So on the other side of that, once you've had contact with these individuals, and this is something that I am currently and have been dealing with for almost a year now, is I've had a lot of families reach out to me because their loved one that's got a developmental disability has had a run-in with the police. Not uncommon, as we were just discussing, but they're terrified. A lot of the times they are read their Miranda rights. They don't understand what that means. Right. They don't understand what the right to remain silent is. A lot of them either will shut down completely, or they will try to talk themselves out of a situation, just incriminating themselves even more. And here's the other side of that. The Federal Disabilities Act allows and requires those individuals to have the right to an ADA advocate to help
Mhm.
explain Miranda rights, explain the situation of what's going on in the courts with any interaction with law enforcement, just so it's a middle person that's not involved with either side, that's able to communicate what the situation is to that individual. Um, and unfortunately, just because a lot of them are just like, I didn't mean to do something wrong. I don't understand. Yes, I was doing this. Yes, I was doing that. That stuff's used against them. And
Right.
I don't know if you're aware of this. Not many people seem to be, but medical diagnoses are not recognized in criminal defense in the state of Idaho.
Correct.
So it does not matter if you have a diagnosis when it
Or a
comes to
history.
prosecuting or a history. They will just charge you and treat you like you're neurodivergent, or excuse me, neurotypical.
Right.
And that's really difficult for these families and these individuals when their entire lives they've been giving accommodations and told, yes, it matters. Yes, we make exceptions to things, until they run into the law and you actually get actual charges. And then they're told, it's fine.
None of it
You just have
applies.
to deal with it. It doesn't
Mhm.
apply any longer. And that's unfortunate because they get sentenced, they get incarcerated with neurotypical individuals, which puts them at even higher risk of becoming victims in prisons and jails. It's not a good situation all around, from basic the contact with the police officer through all the way into sentencing. It's Idaho just needs to make some adjustments, and I am actually working very closely with legislators to try and make an exception to the medical diagnosis where developmental disabilities are
Yeah.
recognized in criminal proceedings if it is a medical history that has been well documented their entire
Right.
lives, to show that yes, there is a reason why this individual probably stole something, or they did something, or touched somebody that they didn't want to
Yeah.
touch, or maybe they did want to do it, but they didn't understand it was wrong.
Right.
Um, I
Do
have
they
a
have
lot
to
of
go
adults
through it?
that sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna what before you. It sounded like you're transitioning. I wanted to ask you a question
Yeah,
about this law, the
Yeah.
court stuff. Is
yeah.
there a requirement to prove functional legal competency?
There is not a requirement. However, all of the cases that I have been working on, I push for that. So as soon as we get somebody involved with it, I was like, get a competency evaluation. And if they get one that's mandated by the court through the court, we always try to get an outside perspective just for the safety of it. So it's somebody that's not involved with the legal system in the state for that jurisdiction, just for the rights of the individual. We have a lot of forensic witnesses that specialize in neurobehavior that are more than willing to come and testify on either the prosecution's half or the defense half, on just the behaviors of these individuals. I've had a prosecutor up here in northern Idaho recently reach out to me about a little boy that was in a situation being victimized by an adult male. And I was asked, would he lie? And I was like, let's have a conversation about this. Like,
Mm.
what is the situation? Why are we not believing somebody just because they're neurodivergent?
Right.
I've got individuals that are adults that have the cognitive age of a 10-year-old that I have been dealing with for almost a year. The courts don't care that he functions as a 10-year-old and acts like a 10-year-old. He is legally and physically the age of an adult male, and they're charging him as such because they don't care that he's autistic, even though he's got, oh
Tiffany,
my
can I add to
lord.
that real quick?
Absolutely. Please do.
So there's this movie, if you haven't seen it, it's an older movie. It's called Jack, and it's got Robin Williams in it. Have you guys seen that? Where he's
Yes.
an older man. He looks physically like an older man, but he's actually a little boy. So the emphasis behind this movie is that Jack, his cells develop twice as quickly physically than his mental aspect of it. And so he's 6 years old, but he looks like a 20-year-old dude. You know, he's 10 years old, but he looks 40. The whole reason I bring this up is is because we see these things in movies and we empathize, and we cry because we feel bad, and it's because we have this background of, oh well, he looks this way but he's actually this. It's the same concept.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
we empathize in movies. Why aren't we empathizing with people in person? This is an actual thing where we have, like Tiffany was just saying, we have this guy who's an adult, but he's actually a kid cognitively. And these are the things that they don't take into account in the court system. And when we have these situations that happen, and it's documented, it's not something that we can go, oh, it's when they plead, oh, definition of insanity. That's something they could pull, and you don't necessarily look at medical history for that. Oh, well, do they have? Oh, okay, well then this makes sense. That does get brought up, but why, if we can give people leeway in that regard, why aren't we doing the same thing with adults with autism?
Yep.
And that's not a blame. That's just a genuine
No.
question.
I think that
And it's difficult for me to be on both sides of that, because I am very supportive and want to train law enforcement. I want those interactions to be safe for everybody.
sure.
And then
Right.
I get called from the families that have already had those interactions,
Yeah.
and they're like, now what? And the state just does not have any avenues for their loved one. There's just
Right.
not an option. So it's unfortunate. It's just black and white. This is how it is.
So I
Um,
think that to part of, I don't know if this would alleviate some of the issues, is when we write reports, we say this, I showed up, this happened, arrested. That's
Yeah.
the basics. Like, don't put too much, just the facts. Well, some of the things that we forget that are a part of facts are objective observations. I saw this, the witness saw that. And what those observations turn into is different shades of color in the greater picture that you're painting. You paint a good picture of what you responded to, what you showed up, what you saw, what you did, how they responded to that, and vice versa. What you end up with is a much clearer image of the totality of the circumstances. It doesn't matter if you're in California, in Idaho, in Texas, Florida, New York. It makes no difference where you are. The standard for taking somebody's Fourth Amendment away is generally probable cause. So probable cause has to exist. It's not a hugely high threshold, but it still exists to move towards prosecution. So writing good reports, articulating what you saw, observations, your training and experience, what you know, what you don't, it's all goes into making the best case. And look, as if you're a cop and you're listening, you're like, man, this is ridiculous. Let me tell you something. If you write a case, so you have somebody on the spectrum, let's just say that they committed a heinous crime, and they're on the spectrum, they're required to get the ADA
advocate.
support advocate.
Yeah.
And you made the attempt, you made the phone call, you brought them in, and their advocate, their attorney, you've done everything by the book. What you've done is you have just put brick and mortar around the foundation of your case. It's not going to take your case away from you. It's not going to steal you of your arrest or your things happen. And if you're doing everything by the book and everything right, then you're doing exactly what's expected.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
just my
I
2
agree.
cents.
I
do
agree.
think
I believe that these officers, they do it by the book. They are reporting it appropriately. It's just the fact that when their reports are being viewed by the prosecution,
Sure.
and then they're like, so, okay, is there any other factors involved in this as to what happened or why it happened? They don't, if it's a medical diagnosis, they're just like, okay.
Also, do we need to update the book?
Yeah.
You know what I'm
That's above my pay grade. I will say
That's
this
what I'm
though.
working on.
With Lylas
Right.
House, where can people find you, support you, do whatever they need to do to make sure that your mission comes to fruition?
Mostly our website right now.
Which
Our
is?
website is lylashouse.com.
Okay.
I'm going to say not we, Tiffany runs our socials right now. So you can find us at facebook.com/Lylas House Inc. And then on our Instagram, which she's trying to get backup is underscore Lylas House underscore. So but most of our information is on our website,
Okay.
and a lot of what she's doing with law enforcement is there as well.
Do you want to
Yeah.
share your social media or anything that you want people to come and find and follow you?
I don't even have any.
Well, there you go.
I stay off of it. There's too much drama on social media.
Isn't
Chief
there, though?
Ingram in Caldwell is actually really great about
Oh,
his
he's
socials. So,
constantly on it.
yeah.
I noticed.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, then when this launches, we will tag everybody's things that they want and help direct it. We'll clip this and make sure that you're tagged in the posts. And, look, if you're in Idaho and you want to learn more about how to prevent elopement behavior, until something is, in your area and available to you, because it's kind of a spread out place, go to getsafeuniversity.com, click on the elopement prevention response course, sign up. It's self-paced. You can take it as long as you want, as many times as you want, and the information is always going to be there. If you're a cop and you want to recover missing persons, that's there too. And if you want something a little bit more tangible in person, then reach out to us at lawenforcement@getsafeusa.com, and I will be happy to show up and do what I can. And we're trying to bring this guy into the fold too. So to just bank on his training and experience. So Don, I appreciate you for being here.
Yeah.
The gals from Lyla House, thank you so much. I know it's difficult being virtual and everybody else is around the table and you
It
don't
is,
get
it's
as
okay.
much voice, but I do appreciate you coming in today. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thanks for
Thank
having us.
you.
All right.
Yeah.
Until next time.